I wish we had never laid eyes on that cursed Ouija board. Even more, I wish we had never become friends in the first place. Then maybe, just maybe, I could have been spared the horror that friendship unleashed. We seemed an unlikely group at first glance, brought together more by the forced bond of senior year than any genuine closeness. Jake was the class clown, always armed with a bad pun or a prank to cut through the suffocating boredom of high school. Amy buried her nose in books and avoided eye contact, more comfortable among fictional characters than real people. Zoe had joined the cheer squad to make friends, using pep and spirit to conceal a shyness she never quite outgrew. Chris preferred his guitar and his melancholy songs over school politics. Nick never missed a chance to drag a laugh out of any situation. And I was the reasonable one, pulled into this group by the fickle fates of assigned seating and shared college anxiety. We were never supposed to be more than classmates, but the looming specter of graduation changed things. As senior year wore on, we grew closer through college application stress, late-night study sessions, junk food, and too much caffeine. Our friendships formed at different paces. Zoe and Amy bonded over books. Chris finally opened up during late-night guitar sessions at my house. Jake's relentless energy kept all of us moving when anxiety threatened to drag us under. An unlikely camaraderie formed, one we all leaned on as the future crept closer. If I could go back, I would have kept that fellowship neatly inside the walls of high school. But emotions don't respect boundaries. Before we knew it, movie nights and study sessions had turned into weekend sleepovers and inside jokes. We grew to genuinely enjoy each other's company. As the fear of growing up settled in, we clung tighter to our friendships, like a security blanket against the unknown. And in the end, that closeness led us somewhere dark, somewhere none of us saw coming. As senior year wore on, we tried to wring every last drop of adventure from our remaining time together. Week after week, we plotted new escapades determined to make memories before graduation tore us apart. Jake spearheaded most of them, toilet papering the houses of kids we didn't like, sneaking onto the closed county fairgrounds late at night, pooling our money for cheap road trips crammed into Chris's beat-up van. The rest of us were happy to follow, swept along by Jake's infectious enthusiasm and the cathartic thrill of being young and reckless. Our bonds grew tighter with every stupid adventure. But the night that changed everything was the Saturday Jake's parents went out of town, an empty house. 2 precious days of unsupervised freedom before they returned. We planned it like a military operation. Ridiculous in hindsight, the way teenagers treat parties like campaigns. Chris's older brother agreed to buy alcohol. Amy raided her parents' liquor cabinet. Zoe baked cookies and brownies, while Nick built playlists for every mood. I scoured the internet for drinking games. The guys argued over which horror movies would hit hardest. Alibis were rehearsed and perfected. We were ready. The day finally arrived. Amy, Zoe, and I showed up right at 4 in the afternoon. Amy hauled a duffel bag filled with bottles, vodka, rum, tequila, triple sec, pretty much anything she could grab without it being noticed. Zoe came loaded down with snacks, chips, cookies, candy, soda, and all the ingredients for brownies. The guys arrived soon after. Nick and Chris brought a case of beer. Jake carried a towering stack of horror movie DVDs he'd carefully selected for maximum discomfort. Classics alongside a few genuinely disturbing new ones he'd been saving for exactly this kind of night. Jake led us straight to the kitchen to start mixing drinks. The music went up loud. Laughter came easy. Reports sprayed in vodka into red Solo cups and lined up shot glasses on the counter. Jake raised his glass in a toast to fleeting freedom. We cheered before throwing back the alcohol, wincing at the burn, laughing at each other's expressions. The night had just begun, but spirits were already high. Jake's house sat alone at the end of a winding cul-de-sac, isolated from the neighbors by stretches of dense woods. The nearest house was at least 200 yards away. Out there, beyond the glass, the tree line stood dark and perfectly still. The house itself was massive, Vaulted ceilings, marble countertops, a sprawling open floor plan. The kitchen flowed into an immense living room with sleek leather couches, a giant flat screen, and floor-to-ceiling windows facing the woods. At night, those windows looked like black mirrors. Downstairs was our main party zone. Jake had decked out the finished basement with posters, lava lamps, and colorful accent lighting. There was a well-stocked bar along one wall, a stereo system, and the largest sectional couch I had ever seen, wide enough to see all 6 of us comfortably. The plush carpet muffled our footsteps. The low lighting gave the whole space a dim, enclosed feel, like the rest of the world had been sealed out completely. We cranked the music and made immediate use of the bar. Zoe's brownies came out of the oven, filling the house with a rich, warm chocolate smell. We crowded into the kitchen, roasting each other's cooking skills, dissolving into laughter that echoed up through the vaulted ceiling. Around 7, we ordered 4 pizzas and demolished all of them. Stuffed and buzzing, we migrated down to the basement. Jake and Chris argued over which horror movie to start with. Amy and I made popcorn. Nick dug through Jake's vinyl collection for something suitably eerie. We settled on The Exorcist. The lights went down. Jake and Amy curled up together under a blanket. Zoe and Nick sat nearby, whispering and giggling. Chris stretched out across the sectional with his guitar, idly strumming something slow and aimless. I sank into a beanbag chair with a fresh vodka cranberry, buzzing and content, feeling like nothing in the world could reach us down here. We screamed and laughed our way through the film as rain began lashing the windows outside. By the time it ended, we were all a little drunk and vibrating with that particular giddiness that only comes from being unsupervised teenagers who don't know yet what they have to lose. We cranked the music back up. We danced with the reckless abandon of people who believe the night will last forever. Around 9, the energy started to dip. The booze and sugar high was wearing off. We sprawled across the basement, music still pumping, but the enthusiasm fading at the edges. The conversation lagged. The laughter came slower. That's when Jake suggested ghost stories. We all perked up. Outside, the rain had grown heavier, not light anymore, but driving and relentless. The woods beyond the windows had disappeared completely into the dark, replaced by nothing but a wall of black pressing against the glass. The isolation felt real in a way it hadn't an hour ago. Chris went first. His story wandered: a killer clown, a young boy, a plot that quickly collapsed into silliness. We heckled him through most of it, laughing too hard to feel anything close to scared. It ended with the boy and the clown becoming best friends. Then Amy dimmed the lights lower. Her voice dropped to something quieter, more deliberate. She told the story of a girl home alone. Voices in the dark, shadows darting past the doorframe, and a killer who had been hiding inside the house the entire time. Watching, waiting, tucked into the spaces between rooms. Amy had a gift for description that Chris didn't. By the end, nobody was laughing. The story's final image, the girl, the murderer, the sound of something dragging slowly across the floor, landed in the silence and stayed there. A cold, tight knot formed in my stomach. I couldn't stop imagining the same scenario unfolding in this very house. A chilled silence settled over the group. The only sound was the rain against the glass. Somewhere above us, the house shifted with a low, settling creak that none of us acknowledged. We all heard it. Jake stood up abruptly. He had that look, the mischievous glint that meant he'd already decided something and was about to pretend we'd had a choice in it. He said he had an old Ouija board upstairs in his closet. His older brother had given it to him years ago. He wanted us to try it. The reactions were immediate. Zoe refused outright. She believed, genuinely, not just as a bit, that it was dangerous to open doors you didn't understand. Chris called it nonsense. Amy was intrigued but cautious. Nick was immediately enthusiastically on board. I hesitated. After Amy's story, the idea of deliberately inviting something in felt different than it would have an hour ago. But Jake's certainty was contagious. And in the end, as it so often went with Jake, we talked ourselves into it. What harm could really come from a silly game? Jake came back downstairs carrying the board under his arm. He set it on the coffee table and we gathered around. It looked ordinary. Just polished wood, letters and numbers arranged in two neat arcs with yes and no printed in the upper corners. A small planchette, smooth and pale, placed precisely in the center. The candlelight caught the surface and made the letters seem to shift. Amy read the instructions aloud from the back of the box. They were specific. Only one person on the planchette at a time. Never use the board alone. Never ask about God or evil spirits. And always, always say goodbye to formally close the session. Nick joked that we shouldn't bombard any spirits with too many questions at once. The laughter that followed felt thinner than it had an hour ago. Nick went first. He placed his fingers on the planchette with theatrical ceremony, cracking his knuckles, making us smile, and called out to any spirits who might be listening. Nothing moved. He tried several more times, escalating into silliness, leaning in with exaggerated intensity. The planchette sat completely still under his fingers. When his turn ended, Nick leaned back and laughed, not bothering to say goodbye. Zoe snapped at him. She leaned forward herself and spoke a firm, clear goodbye on his behalf, her voice tight with something that wasn't quite humor. Nick rolled his eyes. Zoe stared at him for a moment longer than necessary. Jake went next. He tried both lighthearted and serious approaches, asking questions with the patient focus of someone who genuinely wanted a response. But like Nick, nothing. The planchette didn't move. When the silence made it clear that nothing was coming, Jake sat back with his brows furrowed. He'd wanted something to happen. You could see it plainly on his face. Then Amy said she would go. Zoe tried to talk her out of it. That Amy had used boards before, she said, with her sisters back home. She knew how it worked. She took her seat at the table, closed her eyes, and took several long, deliberate breaths. The basement felt quieter than it should have. She asked in a low and measured tone if any spirit wished to communicate with us that night. We waited. The planchette sat still, and then it moved. It glided across the board with a smooth, unhurried certainty, the kind of movement that doesn't feel like pushing. It drifted slowly and deliberately and stopped firmly over the word yes. Zoe made a sharp sound. Jake and Nick burst into surprised laughter. I felt the cold knot in my stomach return, harder this time as goosebumps spread up both arms. Amy kept her eyes closed. She asked the spirit to give us its name. The planchette moved again, slowly. It traced out a single word across the board, stopping at each letter with quiet precision until it had spelled out the word death. The laughter from the boys went quieter. Zoe leaned back as if something had pushed her. Amy asked how the spirit had died. The planchette answered. One word. Murdered. Even Jake looked genuinely shaken. Nick had gone completely still beside him. Zoe was already beckoning Amy to stop, her voice climbing towards something that sounded like real panic now, not performance. But Amy was somewhere else. Absorbed. Unreachable. She asked the spirit to show itself. The lights went out. Complete darkness. The basement dropped to pitch black in an instant. Someone screamed. The candles we lit earlier flickered wildly and died. The only light came from pale phone screens, thin, trembling beams that barely reached the walls. In the darkness, Zoe broke. She began hyperventilating, her breath coming in short and ragged pulls. Amy and I moved toward the sound of her, reaching through the dark until our hands found her shaking frame. The guys fumbled with their phones, trying to generate enough light to see more than a foot in front of them. Zoe kept saying we needed to close it, that Amy needed to say goodbye. Amy knelt back down beside the coffee table, placed both hands on the dormant planchette, and spoke clearly into the dark. She thanked whatever had been listening. She said goodbye. She asked to be left in peace. Zoe's breathing slowed, just slightly. Above us, through the ceiling, the storm hammered the house. Rain struck the windows in waves. The wind pressed against the walls with a low, persistent moan. And then, from somewhere in the dark end of the basement, a sound. Faint. The soft scrape of something shifting across the floor. None of us spoke. None of us moved. We stood there, in the glow of our phone screens, listening to the dark. None of us could explain what we found down there. We tossed theories around, but none of them held. An earthquake would have left us feeling tremors upstairs. Wind couldn't account for the deliberateness of the mess. The way things had been moved, not fallen. The overturned furniture. The books scattered across the floor. Ornaments pulled from shelves and left in the middle of the room like they had been placed there, not thrown. It looked like something had been searching. My mind cycled through explanations, desperate to land on something rational. It kept failing. Then a clatter snapped every head toward the far corner. The Ouija board, which had been face down when we found it, was spinning. Slowly at first, then faster, until it completed a full rotation and settled face up on the carpet. The planchette lay in the center where it had always been, as if it had never moved. We stood there, staring. And then the letters began to glow. A deep, bleeding red. Not like anything that board could have contained, seeping up through the wood from somewhere underneath. The color pulsed once like a heartbeat. It spelled 3 letters. Run. We didn't need to discuss it. Someone screamed. Then all of us were moving, up the stairs, footsteps pounding the carpet, stumbling into each other in the dark. Terror had replaced every rational thought. We hit the ground floor and didn't stop. Jake reached the front door first. He grabbed the handle and pulled. Nothing. He tried again, twisting, rattling, throwing his whole weight into it. The door didn't move. Not stuck. Not jammed. Just immovable, like the wall around it. We all piled in behind him, tearing at it with both hands. Someone was screaming Jake's name. Jake kept saying it was unlocked. He could see it was unlocked, but nothing we did made any difference. The door held firm, as if the house itself had decided we were staying. We tried the side doors, the windows. Nothing gave. Every exit held closed with that same uncanny resistance, not mechanical, not logical, just sealed. Then the living room furniture began to move. The leather couches scraped slowly across the hardwood floor, pushing inward, closing the space around us. The temperature dropped so fast it felt like stepping into a freezer, a sudden, biting cold that had no source. Our breath came out in visible white clouds. The flashlight beams stuttered, then they died. One by one, the bulbs burst with small, flat cracks. The darkness that followed was absolute. Something was in the house with us. I could feel it the way you feel a person standing too close behind you in a dark room. A weight in the air. A pressure against the back of the neck. It wasn't frightened of us. It wasn't rushing. It moved through the space the way someone moves through a room they know well. We huddled together in the center of the room, blind and shaking. Jake and Nick tried to force the windows. Chris wrapped both arms around Amy, who had stopped screaming and gone somewhere quiet and unreachable inside herself. I held Zoe. She was trembling so hard I could feel her teeth chattering against my shoulder. From somewhere in the dark, not close, but not far enough, a sound. Low. Guttural. The shape of a laugh, but stripped of everything that makes a laugh human. It rolled through the room once and was gone. I squeezed my eyes shut. I told myself this wasn't real. I told myself the cold was from the storm, the sounds were the house settling, the darkness had a rational cause. I told myself all the things you tell yourself when the alternative is too large to hold. But the cold kept biting. The dark kept pressing in. And then, without warning, the lights came back on. The overhead fixtures blazed to full brightness all at once. We flinched, hands flying up, eyes screwed shut against the sudden violence of it. For a moment there was only white. Then the screaming started. Not mine. Not Amy's. Nick's voice, raw and broken, coming from somewhere above. I opened my eyes. I looked up. Zoe was suspended from the ceiling. A noose had been tied around her neck. She hung completely still, swaying almost imperceptibly in air that had no reason to be moving. Her face was slack. Her eyes were open and vacant, looking at nothing, seeing nothing. The lively, warm, anxious girl who had baked brownies that morning and scolded Nick about the rules and trembled in my arms was gone. Something had taken her between one moment and the next. I don't remember making any sound. I don't remember deciding to move. I remember the floor coming up to meet my knees, and Amy already there beside me, and both of us unable to look away from the thing above us that had been our friend. Then the fire started. It erupted from the kitchen without a sound. No crackle, no warning, just a sudden, voracious wall of orange light spilling into the room. The heat hit immediately, a physical force. The flames spread with an unnatural speed, climbing the walls, crossing the ceiling, moving like something alive and purposeful rather than burning. It cut between us and the staircase, between us and Zoe. Jake grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the front door. It opened. Just like that. Easily, completely, as if it had never been locked at all. As if whatever had sealed it had simply decided we were allowed to leave now. We poured out into the storm. The cold outside hit like a wall of water. Rain came down in heavy, driving sheets, soaking us in seconds. The wind was loud enough to swallow sound. We ran down the driveway. Jake pulling Amy, Nick half carrying a staggering Chris, not stopping, not looking back. I looked back. Every window of the house was burning. The flames pressed against the glass from inside, orange and massive, consuming everything. Somewhere in there, Zoe was still suspended from the ceiling. We had left her. There was nothing else we could have done. I have told myself that 10,000 times in the years since. Some nights I almost believe it. We collapsed onto a neighbor's lawn 200 yards down the road. An elderly woman answered the door. She took one look at us. A couple of teenagers soaked through, some barely able to stand. All of us with faces that must have looked like we had seen something that couldn't be unseen, and ushered us inside without a word. She called for help while we sat on her kitchen floor, wrapped in blankets that didn't touch the cold we were feeling. Sirens arrived quickly. Police cars, fire engines. They rushed past us toward the blaze. From where we sat, we could see the glow above the trees. We were separated at the station and interviewed individually. We told them everything. The board, the moving planchette, the glowing letters, the furniture, the cold, the thing in the dark, the noose. We told them all of it. They listened carefully. They took notes. Then they explained, gently, what the physical evidence actually showed. Zoe's body was recovered from the ground floor, badly burned. No evidence of hanging. The autopsy would later list the cause of death as smoke inhalation and thermal trauma. The fire investigators' report would point to an overloaded circuit, possible given the weather, given the age of the electrical system, given that 6 teenagers had been running lights and sound equipment and appliances all evening. As for everything else, there were no other explanations to give. No evidence of a second party. No physical record of anything we described. The conclusion, delivered without cruelty, was that we had been drinking, that the fire had started while we were impaired, that Zoe, disoriented, hadn't made it out. No charges were filed. The investigation closed. What we knew, what we had seen, didn't match what could be proven, and in the absence of proof, the world constructed its own version of that night. A version that fit neatly into things people already understood. Zoe's funeral was the last time we were all in the same room. Her family's grief was immense and raw and aimed directly at us. They needed somewhere for it to go. We were there, and she wasn't, and that was the only logic that mattered to them. We couldn't argue. We couldn't explain. We stood there and received it. Seeing her casket made it real in a way that the house, the fire, the terrible hours after had somehow not. She had been afraid that night. She had known, in the way that Zoe always seemed to quietly know things, that something was wrong. She had tried to stop us. She had said goodbye for Nick when he wouldn't. She had followed the rules. It hadn't mattered. After the funeral, we drifted apart in the way that people do when the thing holding them together has been destroyed. Jake's family left the state before the summer ended. College pulled the rest of us in different directions. There was nothing left to say that any of us were ready to say. I still think about that night. Not constantly, less than I used to. But it returns, the way things return. Late at night, or when a storm moves in and the rain hits the windows in that particular way. When the lights flicker. When a room goes quiet in a way that feels less like silence and more like something listening. Zoe is buried in a cemetery 2 towns over. I drove past it once, years ago. I didn't stop. I don't think she would have wanted me to. There are some losses you don't get to mourn cleanly. Some griefs that don't resolve. They just become part of the architecture of who you are. A cold place inside you that never quite warms, no matter how much time passes. I wish we had never laid eyes on that board. I wish most of all that I had been the reasonable one when it actually mattered.